You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network.
I'm Katrina, and I love anime.
I'm Steven, and I'm aware of anime.
But what if that affection could rub off?
Perhaps that excitement in her eyes got me curious.
I could offer up some solid anime.
I could give them a watch, just to see what all the fuss is about.
And maybe, just maybe,
I could learn to love anime too.
welcome to Inspired by a Weeaboo.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Inspired by a Weeaboo. I am your host Katrina and with me is my husband Steven.
Hello.
We just finished episode 34 of Fullmetal Alchemist. Steven, what did you think?
Well, we got some new information, which I think was good information, and we also had kind of an arc close here. It felt like everything that had been kind of going on with greed has now kind of come to a close, and got some answers and some more questions. And even the way it ended, I'm not complaining per se, but I felt like even the way it ended, I felt like there was... We'll go through it and I'll explain it by the time I get to the end, I'm sure. So we're kind of picking up from where we left off, where the Greed and his crew are trying to get away from the military. Archer has he's proven himself to be a prick, because I didn't trust him, and now I 100% don't trust him, because he reinstates not only Kimberly but Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like completely, you've lost any kind of possible trust I would have in you by reinstating that prick.
Yeah.
So absolutely out of it. He's out for his own benefit, whatever bullshit he's got going on.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the military are gunning down the crew, down the tunnels in which they're trying to escape. Armstrong cuts them off, and there's really only like 2 or 3 left by the time he gets there, because it was like, I didn't catch all their names, but it's like this big dude, the samurai, and then I caught her name, Marta, who was actually inside Al's armor.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the only ones left with Greed. And Armstrong puts the smackdown on this dude, but not before using alchemy to turn his staff into a nice little posing statue of himself.
His hammer.
Looking all like, this is passed down from generations. All his little thing. He's also always saying.
Yes.
But as all this is going on, Lust and Gluttony are watching from the wings, trying to. It's almost like it's like they start all this shit, but they sit back and just let it happen, and then they just wait until they can kind of come in and, take over or take control of whatever situation is being laid out. So they start shit, and then they sit back, watch it burn, and then they come in and take care of it whenever it suits them. They're opportunists. But Armstrong lays the smackdown on that big dude and like starting to beat the shit out of him. Then the guy turns into a big raging half beast, because he doesn't really turn completely, but he kind of gets some size, grows some horns, and looks a little bit more aggressive than he did. And Armstrong does pretty good, and then the guy kind of body slams him and then starts dragging him across, but then he gets the upper hand, smacks him back down, and, because he's not a man to be beaten. He's a man that lays the smack down. Then as he kind of gets him on the ropes, the big guy mentions that he was a former soldier who was part of the Ishbalan War, and this kind of puts Armstrong in a position where he's like, don't want to kill you, but still going to have to turn you in or whatever. But he's not willing to take his life, which he's never seemed like the type to want to kill anyone anyway. So
no,
even
but
with
if
that,
it comes down to it, he's willing to kill.
Yeah, as a soldier, obviously that's where he'll be. But I think knowing he was a prior soldier at one point, just added another wrinkle. He's like, all right, well, I won't kill you today.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But the military arrived to take them all in, but wouldn't you know it, big dude smashes up the wall, and then they slip out again because they're slippery little pieces of shit. And they find themselves in what seemed to be like a little remote cabin. I don't really think we've seen this place before. They're just kind of like a little...
They're just hiding out somewhere.
Yeah, there's a word I'm looking for here, like a
shack?
Safe house, house, something like that. It's what it kind of reminded me of, or something to that effect. And Lust and Gluttony, like I said, they take the opportunity to slide in and let themselves be known. And it's clearly at this point, Greed does not know who Lust is, or has never met this Lust.
Yes.
She makes that perfectly clear. And the samurai cuts Al's chains, tells him to get the hell out, and they were going to stand their ground with Greed, or at least let him get away. So Greed and Al take off, while the samurai and the big dude decide to take on Lust and Gluttony, but I think it's pretty clear they die.
Yeah.
Or at least Gluttony eats them, as he's prone to do. Because we don't actually get to see it, but I mean, we know what happens.
Yeah, considering the next time you see Lust and Gluttony has blood around his mouth.
And said something about eating.
We know what happens. Yeah, he's still hungry.
Yeah, I'm still hungry. So, where was... so, yeah, they leave. Greed leaves with Al, and Greed even asked Al, he said, why didn't you leave? You know, you could have just taken off. And Al kind of seems like he feels an obligation to stick with them for the time being, as if he just, you know, because
kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. He's like, you know, hey, I'm just going to hang out with you just for a little bit. Then Gluttony tells him to hang tight in the forest. He's going to go take care of some business. And of course, this puts Marta into a panic after everything that happened. She feels like she has to go after him. She wants to go with him, but Al refuses to let her out of the armor, which I don't know why you wouldn't just let her out. But again, that just shows how much of a good person he is, because he's trying to protect her.
I mean, they even asked him several times to, you know, the other two chimeras asked him to keep her safe. And then even Greed in his own way, you know, when he tells her to stay in there, like it's to keep her safe.
Yeah.
So it's that whole, again, the chimeras, even though they did not spend a whole lot of time with Greed, they had a literally undying loyalty to the man.
Oh,
he
yeah.
not only saved them, but he treated them like people, and he valued them. And it shows that he values them, because when they're telling him to leave, when Lust and Gluttony show up, Greed's torn about leaving. Like, he wants to stay there and fight, like they're his allies. But, you know, eventually he understands he needs to go and to leave it to them, even though he knows they'll never see him again.
Yeah.
He has a kind heart. He just isn't the best of people. But again, villain origin story. Like,
now, during all this, or after Greed takes off and goes on his little march, he's heading back up to Dante. And Lust and Gluttony seem to be aware that that's where he was going to return, even though that was the last we actually get to see of them in that moment. It's almost like they were just, again, waiting in the wings just to see what was going to happen, but they followed him up there and were just like, yep, we knew this was what was going to happen, and then just kind of leave from that point on. I don't think we'll see him again.
They're kind of like the Watchers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They like to just, you know, I mean, again, they're told, like Les says, this is how she said it was going to play out, or whatever in the heck she said. But they know the path that it's supposed to go down. They're just there to make sure they continue to go down that right path, or the path that they want them to go down. So Greed literally did everything they wanted him to do to end up back at Dante's.
Right. So with Greed going back to Dante, he seems like he has, as we kind of mentioned before, we kind of already got this sense that he knew Dante, that there was some history there. And when he shows up there, the maid takes him to his remains, of his old body, which didn't look very old. I mean, there were some small ass little bones, you know. So I mean,
well, I would say he's definitely one of the older homunculus, especially if he didn't know lust, because she's not old, but she is one of the older-esque ones.
Right. So that was kind of implied at that point that he would return to where he was created.
Yep.
Which I don't think I really... I'd said that she had something to do with it, but I didn't necessarily predict it was in that house that it happened. So that wasn't necessarily what I thought, but I knew she had something to do with it. And he was asking about where Dante was. Now, this is the part of it that I'm a little sketchy on. Like, I'm not 100% sure I understood what was going on here, because we saw her body, Dante's body, and it was just a split open husk of just, I mean, she's dead, but I feel like there's more to it.
There is.
Okay. Because it was just such a casual, just like, yep, she's over there, she's dead. And they never really explained anything. And I was like, bullshit. Where's she going to come back up? Where is she at? What is she up to? Because she knew what was going to go down. She knew he would come back. All this was planned because even the maid, whose name we can't remember, she had set a trap for him. And I can't remember what he called it specifically, but it was essentially like a big seal. And then it just caused him to vomit up all these stones, much like Wrath had been munching down all the stones. Apparently he had as well. And I wasn't 100% sure if this was weakening him.
Yes.
But was this why... I mean, that couldn't have been the source of his power.
The stones, no.
Okay.
The thing that, throwing up the stones weakened him because the philosopher stones that they eat, that is what is basically keeping them alive.
Yeah.
Without those, they become weak, and then you can kill them. But, as Greed says, after him and Edward fight, I'll let you get into more of that before I explain more.
Yeah, because Ed arrives pretty much, I mean, right after all that happens. And then he's looking around. He sees Dante's body lying there on the floor. And of course he starts, you did this, didn't you? And starts assuming the worst. Of course, Greed's just like, I don't really give a shit. Doesn't matter. Pretty much taunts Ed into another fight. And if he knows one thing, he knows he can do that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it takes nothing for him just to spin a few words and Ed's ready to throw down.
Yeah.
Doesn't give a shit about the situation, not having any idea on how to fight or take him down. Of course, he does come up with a way, but it's just funny how he just, come on, dude, you can't take me down. What do you got? What do you got? And then the fight ensues. So obviously he did. And immediately he busts his arm on the armor, or Greed's armor. So, but it didn't damage completely, you know. And he even mentions Winry had done some extra special work on his hand this time. So where it might be busted, but it's still functional, which, you know, good on her. It shows her capability, her skill. And Greed continues to taunt him, saying, you better be ready to kill. He's like, because that's the only way you're going to take me down. And Ed pulls out a secret trick and does what I was assuming, but I wasn't sure how exactly this was going to work. So he used alchemy to one-up Greed. And what it does is tears away, not all of it, but just like a fraction of, kind of opens up a weak spot. Yeah, on his armor. So, and then he explains that what he's using is carbon, or the element of carbon, manipulating that away from the skin, or the armor, if you will. And then he manipulates that, moves it away, exposes his flesh, and now he's got a weak spot. But it does regenerate, so it's not like an open wound completely. It's like a weak spot. You've got a moment to take your shot. So kind of keeps it interesting without being like, oh, well, I'm just going to take you down. So once he has that in his arsenal, they continue to fight. And Greed finally, or he puts up a hell of a fight, but Al or Ed gives one good hit to the chest area, opens it up, and then gives him one good run through and stabs him right good. Then, as he's bleeding out, he tells Ed that he let Al go and just doesn't really care. But then he also shares this little tidbit, which this was interesting. We actually had to back it up because I felt like he was saying something very important. I was like, I'm missing something. My brain is not hearing it. I'm watching him talk and I'm not processing it because I was in the middle of typing shit. But so tell me if I got this right. He told Ed that homunculi can only be killed near the people who created them.
No. They can only be killed when they are close to the remains of the person they were created from. That's why the skeleton was laying on the table. That was Greed's original body when he was human.
See, I even backed it up and I didn't hear it.
Yes. It's because the way that he states, like the way that he says it, because it's not just like, it comes down to the remains, but it's also they're weakened when they're like close to them. And for him, on top of it, it was in the spot where all of it happened. But the main thing is those remains.
Okay. So
when they are close to their remains, they are weakened.
So their own personal remains from which they came.
Yes.
So how would Wrath be killed then? That seems like a loophole.
Yeah, because he no longer has a body.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, in any case, since he's been stabbed and he was bleeding and coughing up blood and all that jazz, he convulses, then dies. And Ed is kind of overcome because this was technically the first person he killed.
Yep.
So he's kind of, like you could see, it just took a toll on him because enemy, regardless, he just took a life. And now he just kind of feels distraught by it. Now, this is the part where I feel like I had a problem with the episode because I felt like right after this, there needed to be just a little bit more, I don't know, just a little bit more to flesh out the ending because everything just kind of ended quick. Like they just kind of rushed through everything. So after he died, we see Ed, Al, and Azumi burying, who I'm assuming is I guess his body or his original body, the remains of that, and then the remains of Dante. And having that buried, then we see Kimberly and Archer. Did Archer have like a bag of diamonds?
No, that was Greed's skull.
Greed's skull, okay.
Yes, that is what Greed kept with him. That was what was in that bag, and that's why he freaked out. Or at least not freaked out, but if you watch his facial expressions when Kimberly and Archer show up and he realizes he betrayed them, when he sees the sack, his eyes, where they get like the pupils get really small, where it's like that, oh fuck type type look. That's the look he got because he realized they now have something that can take him down.
Okay, so now how exactly would that work? Because now, granted, we didn't get to see that in play here because Ed manipulated that whole cycle. But would he have been able to kill him had he not been there, knowing, like, using the same technique?
What do you mean, had he not been there?
Had they not been at the house near his remains, would Ed still have been able to kill him without being near his bones? Like, the whole situation still being the same, but say that Greed's body was not there. Like the whole rule of this is how you weaken homunculi. If that had not been there, would he have still been able to pull that off? Even using the alchemy and doing all that?
No, because Greed would have been able to regenerate.
Like
his power isn't just the shell. He can literally regenerate. He like fucking Deadpool style. You chop off an arm, he can grow it back.
That's right.
Like, chop off his head, he grows it back.
That's right.
So it's kind of in the sense of Wolverine, you weaken his healing ability, which was not just being close to the remains, but also purging the Philosopher's Stones and stuff, because those do help give them their power and their nourishment. So it's basically they weakened him, and then that's the way Edward was able to actually kill him.
Gotcha.
Because if he hadn't have been anywhere near his remains and they hadn't have weakened him with the Philosopher's Stones, then him stabbing him, Greed could have just healed.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was trying to put all that together, and then now that you're saying it, that all makes sense now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, but after all that, and of course that skull's not going to do them any good now, because
Nope.
I mean, you got it, but what good does it do? Because now he's dead, and then the brothers and Winry say goodbye to Izumi and Sig, and they're on their way, and that's what I mean. It just felt like, well, we're done here. And again, that's why I felt like, I mean, we did end this arc, and that's what it felt like. It felt like this arc was over, but it just felt like it ended so abruptly.
I mean, like, it's still, I don't feel like, I don't remember Greed, like that specific Greed coming back into play, because again, we kind of got, you know, at least some of his backstory. We know Dante obviously is the one that did a human transmutation, and therefore Greed was born. That's why he refers to her as, you know, an old friend, and that's why she had his remains.
Yeah.
But it wasn't ever like he didn't resent her like the other homunculi resent their quote unquote creators.
Yeah.
But he also was very indifferent with her. But I will say Dante does come back into play. Like, not her, the old woman in the sense, but just her story isn't finished.
Right, which I figured.
You find out more about her.
You mentioned, because again, the way her body was just laying there, it felt like a setup. Like there was something more going on.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, but I was like, no, there's something up.
Yeah.
Because they just show back up and she's dead, and dead in a very horrific way. It wasn't just like, oh, she's dead in a chair. No, she was split in half.
Split in half.
So that's where I was sitting there thinking, maybe she just shed some skin or something. I don't know. I mean, she's a mysterious old woman.
Skinwalker.
So I don't know what's going on with her, but
it's not just her, but the maid disappeared.
All right. So yeah, the maid did disappear. That's true. But like I said, it just ended so abruptly, and it just kind of, I know it wasn't done, like the series is not done, but it just kind of caught me off guard how quick it just said, well, it's over.
Believe me, it'll come back into play.
Right. I was just wanting a little bit of closure, I guess, on a few little details, but again, we'll probably get that later, and I'm impatient. Just the way they laid it out just felt a little rushed.
That's okay. I'm impatient because I can't freaking wait until Hohenheim shows up and you get to flush out his story and everything else, because everything's connected.
Hashtag all connected.
Yes. We are one.
Well, I really don't have anything else to say about this episode, I guess.
It will be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah. That's all we can say. Well, Weebs, tell all your anime friends to find us on their favorite podcasting platform. Support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/pencilpaperproductions. Listen on YouTube if you prefer. Pencil Paper Productions is the @ There's an @ on YouTube now. Go figure. I don't understand why we need that. So that's where we're at Pencil Paper Productions. And you can also follow us on the website, pencilpaperproductions.com/inspired weeaboo if you prefer. And as always, links are in the show notes down below.
All right, my little weebs. We will see you next time.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.